temptation as we meet the living word. All is vain unless the Spirit of the Holy One comes down. Dear friends, pray and holy manna will be showered all around. Let us pause before our Maker and in silence hear Christ's voice. Christ the living Word now meets us in His truth. Let us rejoice. What we are should not appall us, for God's mercy meets us here. We are now made one in Jesus. May our worship be sincere. Let us love our God supremely. Let us love each other too. Let us love and care for people till God makes their lives anew. As we walk through the earth gladly, let us speak the truth in love. Transform lives and faithful action here on earth as it is above.
Good morning, Reedwood friends. It's good to meet with you here in this space. I want to talk about things that bring refreshment in your life. Whenever I think of refreshment, maybe after a long day of working outdoors and a nice, tall, cool glass of lemonade, there's the factor of being refreshed. Or maybe when you hear the word refresh, your thoughts are a little bit more techie. Thinking of the refresh button on your computer screen in order to get it right back to where it was after maybe you left it for a duration of time. Whatever your thought is, I wanted to ask you, what comes to mind when you consider the word refreshed? What does that mean to you? More specifically, when do you feel spiritually refreshed? After reading in the Bible, or maybe a devotional reading, a particular author that speaks clearly to your condition, and you come away from that reading feeling refreshed. Maybe it's spending time outside, simply out in creation, or even spending time in a deep spiritual conversation with someone that you respect or feel loved by. You feel refreshed. It's cathartic. It's a reset button. It's all the things. It's a spiritual glass of lemonade, so to speak. Paul's letter to Philemon refers to him as someone that refreshed the hearts of the saints. It was Paul's hope that his own heart would be refreshed in Christ by Philemon's actions and outcomes from this letter to Philemon that we have begun exploring and searching through. When we consider the letter in its context, one thing that Paul does beautifully and rhetorically, he asks Philemon to give reprieve to Onesimus for his offense. That's the context of the letter. There's friction, there's some sort of tension there between this relationship, and Paul is writing almost as a mediator between the two to give reprieve to Onesimus, to extend grace to him. We don't know definitively if Paul is asking Philemon to release Onesimus from slavery, from the bondage of slavery, because that's the current situation where Onesimus is a slave. Philemon is the owner. And so it doesn't come out clearly in the letter if that's what Paul is asking Philemon to do, but I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to think that there would be that leap in Paul's mind, that would be an outcome of this. Whatever the offense was, Paul is asking Philemon to essentially do these three words: let it go. Whatever offense that Onesimus has done to Philemon, Paul is saying, put that on my account. Put it against me. May I be charged to my account whatever losses that he may have faced because of this offense that Onesimus has done. Paul is asking Philemon to embrace Onesimus not in a way that he once did, but in a way that he is embracing Onesimus now as a brother in Christ Jesus. It's this action of reprieve that Paul is saying, this will refresh my heart. My heart is refreshed when these things are let go, when there is a definitive action of grace taking part in the world today. Taking that into consideration, we have to ask ourselves then, I think it begs the question, do we hold on to hurts? Do we do what Philemon has done? Or maybe we would identify more with Onesimus. Either way, whatever the case may be, do we hold on to hurts? Do we nurse grudges against people that may have done something to us years ago? Whether that person is sorry for them or not, it's still our choice to nurse this, or it's still our choice to hold on to hurts. Do we do that? For Paul, it was an occasion where it was worth writing a letter to Philemon on behalf of Onesimus, because in light of Christian love and in light of unity being within the church there, Paul saw to it that it was important to address this. Paul's advice to Philemon would be his advice to us about letting it go. It's time to move on and to grow in gracious living. That would be a goal and an outcome of this letter. Gracious living, ways of knowing how to live more graciously in this life and in tune with the spirit and being of God in Christ Jesus himself. So, letting go, what does that mean then? I mean, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to kind of wrap our heads around it and say, what do you mean, Mark? What are you getting at? Well, I want to offer 3 points of what letting go may or may not mean. Number 1, letting go doesn't mean you forget. I'm not asking, and Paul doesn't ask Onesimus and Philemon to forget what has happened between them. That's not what's going on here. Letting go does not mean you forget, but choose to no longer hold over people what they may have done wrong. Letting go does not mean you forget, but it means you choose to no longer hold over people what they may have done wrong. And that's something that the grace of God flowing through you, flowing through me, can allow to take place. Secondly, letting go may not mean reconciliation in terms of a relationship, but what letting go may mean in that respect for someone that the relationship may be irreparable, or maybe the person has moved away, maybe the person has died, and there is no two-way relationship, but it does mean moving forward in our lives, and yet we still live our lives to exercise and sow goodness in the gardens of our lives, within our personal relationships, our professional relationships, our church relationships, and our relationship with the world. And then thirdly, letting go means that we no longer view ourselves through the tragedy and the hurt that has happened to us, but we view ourselves through the sight that God sees and looks at us with. And that sight is one that is beloved. Despite what has happened, despite what you have done, when God looks at us, he sees us as his beloved, as those that are trying to choose him. Notice I didn't say choose him, but are even trying to choose him. I think God looks on to human beings that seek him and try to do what is right and pleasing in his sight, and he looks on in love, kind of like you would look on in love to a child that is learning to walk and that is trying to come to you but falls. As a parent, you would not despise such a child, but you would be in there with them. You would be encouraging them. You would be for them. You would be right there. I think that's what God does with us that are reaching and striving for him. The pathos of the letter is saying, look at the bigger picture here, Philemon. The work of Christ and the gospel of Christ is to bring us to a place and platform of wholeness. Today being Mother's Day, if there's one thing that my mother taught me in life, it's how to get along with people. Even people that are vastly different from myself. There are three main things I recall my mom telling me on how to get along with others, how to get along with people. Number one, she would either say or she would just embody, people need to be heard. They want to tell their story. They want to talk about themselves, and that's okay, because that affords an opportunity for us to know others. Two, she would say people need to be shown they are cared for. I think that's the work of ministry, showing people that they are cared for. And my mother would embody that. She would teach that and speak that, of how to effectively connect with other people. And then thirdly, people need to witness the love of Jesus. Whatever that witness to the love of Jesus may be, my mom would encourage that, and she tried to do that in her relationships and in her life. I think what was on Paul's heart was for this house church to see the bigger picture of life and relationships. I think this is what was on Paul's heart for this little house church there in the ancient world, for them to see the bigger picture of this life and to see the bigger picture of these relationships, to have the will of God be done within that small space. This is a challenge to me here on this Sunday and here as we study this book, to examine myself and to consider, am I withholding refreshment in my own spirit and life because of what I'm withholding from someone else, or even withholding from myself? A gracious way of viewing things, a gracious way of viewing ourselves, or a gracious way of viewing others, and seeing that we all have the proverbial feet of clay. Rich blessings to you, especially mothers, mother figures, and women of strength. Thank you for all that you have brought into our lives. You've brought strength, you've brought dignity, value, and purpose. May this meditation center our lives here for this week and this day, and may the peace of Christ lead us in the ways of Jesus so that we can be whole in all of our relationships within and without. Peace and blessings to you.
Hi, Reedwood family. I'd like to share a tribute to my grandmother, Edith Hendrickson Roos. She's always been an inspiration to me. She was actually my second mother because my family lived with her when I was a child. She was born on a farm in Finland before the turn of the century, and she died in 1981, which is almost 40 years ago now. Hard to believe. She had a great sense of adventure, and I think I inherited a bit of that from her. She decided to emigrate to America from Finland when she was just 18 years old. She boarded a ship for Ellis Island by herself. No one else in the family came with her, none of her brothers and sisters, though I do believe she had a few relatives in America at the time. She spoke Swedish. She was a Swedish-speaking Finn, not much English at the time, but from the time I can remember her as a child, she spoke English beautifully with just a slight accent. She lived through the Great Depression, and when my grandfather, who was a skilled carpenter, was out of work during those hard times, when no one was building houses, she had to support the family as a housekeeper and a cook for wealthy people who somehow weren't touched by the Depression. And I recall many stories from the period when she had to pawn her wedding ring many times to survive those hard days. And here is a picture of her as a young bride on her wedding day. My grandmother, Edith Hendrickson Roos. Happy Mother's Day, everyone.
Hi friends, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. See you soon.
I'd like to honor my mother on this Mother's Day. If she was living today, she would be 111 years old, but she died at age 63, having known only 2 of her grandchildren, our children, Tony and Aaron. When my mother was 8 years old, her own mother died, and eventually she was adopted by an adult cousin. She lived through the Depression, and she and my father had to wait to get married because of that. They met in college, in junior college, and she worked with my father in the ministry for over 15 years in small churches. She reared 6 children, all who are followers of Christ to this very day. Mother was loving and kind, and she lived by the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians 5:22. Love, joy, peace, gentleness, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. She had a hard life at times, but she was an example to her children and to her community. I miss her. And her name, Bertha Beck-Mann Hill. And I look forward to seeing her again someday in heaven.
Hello there. Here are the announcements for the week of May 10th. You are invited to attend the Zoom meeting at 11:15 Sunday morning for our weekly time of guided worship. And since Sunday is Mother's Day, there will also be some time set aside for us to share about mothers or other women who have been influential in our lives. On Tuesday, the Red Cross will be conducting a blood drive, and that will actually be at Reedwood in the Friendship Center. The time will be from 1 in the afternoon until 6:30 p.m. And if you feel you can be safe to go out and help in that effort, they really do need the help, as the Red Cross is struggling at this time to keep up their donations. Also on Tuesday, tune in to our weekly minute continuing a sharing of our faith and life journeys. The one from Scott Dietz last week was excellent. On Wednesday at 6:30, our fellowship symposium will have a discussion theme of addressing racial aggression and tensions. How do we express solidarity, unity, and love to all our neighbors? Other than that, stay tuned for the e-news and other communications sent out by Cappy and Mark, and stay healthy.